When you think about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, one image usually comes to mind: strength, unshakable faith. A man who stood alone against an entire nation, who rejected falsehood when everyone around him accepted it, who was thrown into fire and remained firm without hesitation. This is the image most people carry, a symbol of certainty, of courage, of complete trust in Allah, and rightly so. His life is filled with moments that show a level of strength most people cannot even imagine reaching. But now pause for a moment and consider something deeper. Can someone like that ever feel fear? At first, the question itself feels uncomfortable, because when you see someone as strong, as firm, as unwavering, it becomes difficult to imagine them experiencing something as human as fear. It almost feels like it contradicts the image you have built. But this is where understanding begins to change, because strength does not mean the absence of fear. It means how you respond when fear appears. And even the strongest hearts, even the most certain believers, can experience moments where something unexpected enters, something that makes them pause, something that creates uncertainty, even if only for a brief moment. And this is exactly what happened in the life of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Not in a moment of weakness, not in a situation where his faith was shaken, but in a moment so subtle, so human, that many people overlook it completely. A moment that does not reduce his strength, but actually makes it more real, more relatable, more powerful. Now think about this carefully. You live your life believing that strong people do not feel fear. Those who have faith, who are confident, who trust Allah, should always feel certain, always feel calm, always feel in control. And when you fear yourself, you begin to question your own strength. Why do I feel this way? Why does my heart react like this? Why do I hesitate when things become uncertain? But what if fear itself is not the problem? What if the real question is not whether fear exists, but how you deal with it when it appears? Because in that moment in the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, something happened that created a brief sense of unease. Not panic, not doubt in Allah, but a natural reaction to a situation that did not feel normal, something that did not follow the usual patterns of life. And this is where the story becomes powerful, because it shows you that even a prophet, someone chosen by Allah, someone with the highest level of faith, can experience a moment where the heart pauses, where the mind begins to question what is happening, where the situation feels uncertain, but what makes the difference is what comes next. Because fear on its own does not define you. It is what you do after it appears that matters. Now reflect on your own life. How often do you feel fear in situations that are unclear? Moments where something does not make sense, where you do not have all the answers, where you are unsure about what is coming next. And in those moments, what do? Do you let that fear control you? Do you step back, hesitate, lose direction? Or do you move through it, even if the feeling is still there? This is the lesson that begins to form here, that fear is not something that removes strength, it is something that reveals it. Because when everything is clear, when everything is certain, strength is easy. But when something unexpected happens, when you do not fully understand what is going on, that is when your response truly matters. And this is exactly the kind of moment Ibrahim alayhi salam faced. A situation that did not follow normal expectations. A moment where something felt off, where something did not align with what he knew. And it began with something simple. Guests. Strangers arriving without warning, without explanation. At first it seemed like an ordinary moment. An opportunity to show hospitality, something deeply rooted in his character. But as the situation unfolded, something changed, something subtle, but enough to create a feeling that could not be ignored. And this is where the moment of fear begins to take shape, not as weakness, but as a human response to something that did not feel right. And what happened next would turn that moment into a lesson that reaches far beyond that time, far beyond that place, and directly into your own life. It began like any ordinary moment. There was no warning, no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Just a quiet setting, a calm environment, and then suddenly, the presence of guests, strangers, unknown, unannounced, and unfamiliar. Now pause and imagine that. You are in your space, where everything feels normal, predictable, and then, without expectation, people appear. You do not know who they are. You do not know where they came from. You do not know their intention. At first it may not seem like a problem, because in the culture of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, hospitality was not just a habit, it was a value. Welcoming guests, honoring them, providing for them, this was something natural, something done without hesitation. And this is exactly how he responded. No suspicion, no delay, no questioning their presence, just immediate action. He moved to honor them, to serve them, to treat them with respect as any guest would be treated. Now reflect on this. This tells you something important about his character. Before anything unusual happened, before any feeling of unease appeared, his first instinct was generosity, to give, to serve, to welcome, because true character shows itself in the first reaction. And his reaction was clear. He prepared food, not something small, not something rushed, but something that reflected care, something that showed that these guests were valued, even though they were unknown. Now imagine the scene. Guests seated, food prepared, everything is set in a way that feels normal, expected, comfortable. From the outside, there is nothing that suggests anything unusual. It looks like a simple act of hospitality. But sometimes the most important moments begin in ways that look ordinary, because what makes this situation different is not what is visible at first. It is what begins to change slowly, subtly, almost unnoticeably. Now think about human interaction. There are patterns you expect. When you offer something, you expect a response. When you welcome someone, you expect them to respond in a way that feels natural. These patterns create a sense of normalcy, a feeling that everything is as it should be. But what happens when those patterns are broken? What happens when something small, something simple, does not follow the way it normally does? This is where the mind begins to notice. At first, it may not be scary. It may just be awareness. A quiet observation that something is not aligning the way it should, and this is exactly what began to happen. The guests were there, the food was placed in front of them, everything was ready. But something did not feel right. Now pause here, because this is the turning point. This is where an ordinary moment begins to shift into something else, something that cannot be ignored, something that begins to create a question in the mind. Who are these people? Not out of suspicion at first, but out of observation, because when something doesn't follow the normal pattern, the mind naturally begins to search for understanding. And this is where the emotional tone begins to change, from comfort to awareness, from normal to uncertain. Not yet fear, but the beginning of something that could lead to it. Now reflect on your own life. How often do situations begin this way? Normal at first, then something small changes, something feels off, not enough to react strongly, but enough to notice, enough to create a question, and in that moment, your mind begins to shift. You become more aware, more focused, trying to understand what is happening. This is exactly the space Ibrahim alayhi salam was in. A moment that started with generosity, with openness, with trust. And slowly, something began to change. Something that did not match what he expected. And this is where the situation moves forward. Because what happened next was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was something simple. But that simplicity carried a weight that changed everything. The guests did not eat. And that small detail would turn a moment of hospitality into a moment of fear. At first, it was just a small detail. The food had been placed in front of them. Everything was ready. The gesture was complete. In any normal situation, this is the moment where the atmosphere settles. People begin to eat, conversation follows, and the sense of familiarity grows. But this time, that moment never came. The guests did not move. Now pause and focus on that. They did not reach for the food. They did not respond in the way any guest normally would. They remained as they were, still, silent, untouched by what had been offered to them. And this is where everything begins to change. Because in that time, in that culture, refusing food was not something small. It was not something neutral. It carried meaning, deep meaning. When a guest refused to eat, it was not seen as a simple choice. It was often understood as a sign of something else, a signal that something was wrong, that the intention behind their visit might not be peaceful. Now imagine being in that moment. You have welcomed strangers. You have shown them respect. You have prepared food for them, and now they sit in front of you, refusing to eat, without explanation, without reaction, without any sign of normal human behavior. This is not just unusual, it is unsettling, because the pattern has been broken completely, and when patterns break in a way that cannot be explained, the mind begins to move quickly, trying to understand, trying to interpret, trying to protect. This is where the feeling begins to form, not yet full fear, but something close to it, a tension, a quiet awareness that something is not right, something that does not align with anything familiar. And this is exactly what happened to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. The moment he noticed that they were not eating, something inside him shifted. The calmness of hospitality gave way to a sense of unease, because from everything he understood, this was not normal behavior. Now reflect on this deeply. This was not fear without reason. It was a response based on observation, based on experience, based on understanding how people behave and recognizing when something does not match that behavior. And this is important, because fear is not always irrational. Sometimes it is a signal, a response to something that requires attention. A moment where your awareness increases because something does not feel safe or clear. And even someone like Ibrahim alayhi salam, with his strength, with his certainty, experienced that moment. His heart felt it, that quiet shift from comfort to caution, from openness to awareness, from normal to uncertain. Now imagine the silence in that moment. No movement, no explanation, just a space where something feels off but has not yet been explained. And in that silence, the mind begins to fill the gap. Who are they? Why are they here? What do they want? These are not spoken questions, but they exist internally, because when information is missing, the mind searches for answers. And this is where fear begins to take shape more clearly. Don't panic. Not overwhelming khof, but a controlled, contained feeling that something is not right. A readiness, a state where you are alert, aware, prepared for something that you do not yet understand. Now bring this back to yourself. You have experienced moments like this, not the same situation but the same feeling, when something does not make sense, when someone behaves in a way you do not expect, when the environment shifts in a way you cannot explain, and in those moments your heart reacts before your mind fully understands. That is what was happening here. And this is what makes this moment so powerful, because it shows you that even a prophet, someone chosen, someone with immense strength, can experience that human response. That moment where something feels uncertain. But the story does not stop there, because what makes this moment truly meaningful is what happens next. The moment when uncertainty turns into clarity, when the unknown is revealed, when fear is replaced with understanding. Because those guests were not what they appeared to be. and the truth behind their presence was about to change everything. When the truth was revealed, everything changed. The unease, the silence, the uncertainty, it all shifted in a single moment. The strangers were no longer strangers. The fear that had quietly entered the heart was replaced with something else, something deeper, something that carried both relief and awe at the same time. They were angels. Now pause and reflect on that. What began as a moment of uncertainty, something that felt unfamiliar and unsettling, was actually something far greater. Not a threat, not dangerous, but a message, a purpose that was beyond what could be seen at first. And this is where the story takes a powerful turn, because their presence was not random. They did not come without reason. They came with news. Two types of news, both carrying weight, both revealing something important. The first was something unexpected, glad tidings. Now imagine hearing that in that moment, after the shift from fear to understanding, after realizing who they are, you are given news that changes everything, news that brings hope, that brings joy, that feels almost beyond what you expected, a son. Not just any news, but something deeply personal, something that touches the heart in a way that goes beyond explanation. Because this was not something ordinary. This was something that came at a time when it seemed unlikely, when it did not follow normal expectations. And this is where the emotional depth increases, because the same moment that began with uncertainty now carries joy. The same situation that created tension now brings relief. This is the nature of how things unfold. Sometimes what begins as something uncomfortable leads to something beautiful, but you do not see it at the beginning. You only understand it once the truth is revealed. Now reflect on that in your own life. How many situations have you faced where something felt wrong at first? Where you felt uneasy, unsure, even afraid, and later you realized that it carried something positive, something meaningful, something that you could not see in the moment. This is exactly what happened here. But the story does not stop with glad tidings, because alongside mercy there is also justice. The second message was not light. It was not something that brought joy. It was something serious, a warning. The angels were also sent for another purpose, to carry out the command of Allah upon the people of Lut alayhi salam. Now pause here. This is where the contrast becomes powerful again. On one side, glad tidings, mercy, a gift. On the other side, warning, consequence, justice, both delivered at the same moment, both parts of the same reality. Because life is not only one or the other, it is a balance, a combination of mercy and accountability, of reward and consequence. And this is what this moment reveals, that Allah's plan is not limited to one outcome. It includes both. It includes giving and taking. It includes ease and difficulty, and both have purpose. Now imagine the weight of that realization, standing in a moment where you receive something that brings joy, while also being made aware of something that carries seriousness. It creates a depth of understanding that goes beyond a simple experience, because it shows you that what is happening in the world is not random. Those events carry meaning. Those actions lead to outcomes. That mercy and justice exist together. And this is where the lesson becomes clearer. The same angels who brought glad tidings also carried a command of destruction, not out of imbalance but out of justice, because dhulm does not go unnoticed, because actions have consequences. Now reflect again on the beginning of this story, a moment of fear, a moment where something felt uncertain, unclear, unsettling. And now, that same moment has unfolded into something far greater, a realization, a message, a connection between what is felt and what is understood. This is what makes this moment so powerful, because it shows you that what you feel at the beginning is not always the full picture. That fear, uncertainty, discomfort, they are sometimes just the beginning of something that carries meaning you cannot see yet. And this is where the story begins to come together, because the focus is no longer just on what happened. It moves toward what it teaches, what this moment of fear actually means, and why it matters to you. At the beginning of this story, there was a question: can someone strongly feel fear? Now you have your answer: yes. Even a prophet, even someone like Ibrahim alayhi salam, whose faith was unshakable, whose trust in Allah was complete, experienced a moment where something felt uncertain, a moment where his heart reacted to a situation that did not make sense, and yet that moment did not reduce his strength. It revealed it. Now pause and reflect on this carefully, because many people carry a misunderstanding. They believe that feeling fear means they are weak, that if their Iman was stronger, they would not feel hesitation, they would not feel uncertainty, they would not feel that moment where their heart reacts before their mind fully understands. But this story shows you something different. Fear itself is not the problem. It is what you do when fear appears that defines you, because fear is a natural response. It is part of being human. It is something that appears when you face the unknown, when something does not follow what you expect, when your environment shifts in a way you cannot immediately understand. Even Ibrahim alayhi salam felt that moment. But look at what happened next. He did not let that feeling control him. He did not act out of panic. He did not lose his direction. Instead, the moment passed, the truth was revealed, and clarity replaced uncertainty. This is where real strength lies, not in never feeling fear, but in not being controlled by it. Now bring this back to your own life. How often do you face situations where things feel unclear, where something happens that you did not expect? Where does your heart react with hesitation, with concern, with uncertainty? And in those moments, what do you tell yourself? Do you see it as a weakness? Do you question yourself? Do you feel like something is wrong with you because you are not completely calm, completely certain, completely unaffected? Or do you recognize it for what it is? A moment, a natural response that does not define your entire state. Because the truth is, everyone experiences these moments. The difference is in how they respond. Some people allow fear to stop them, to control them, to push them away from what they should do. Others feel it, acknowledge it, but move forward anyway. This is the difference between being controlled by fear and being aware of it. And this is exactly what you learn from Ibrahim alayhi salam. That strength is not about removing fear completely. It is about placing your trust in Allah even when fear is present. It is about understanding that your emotions do not define your faith. Your response does. Now reflect on something deeper. That moment of fear was not meaningless. It was part of a larger experience. It led to understanding. It led to a message. It led to something that carried both mercy and warning. So even that feeling, that brief moment of uncertainty, had a place. It was part of the process. And this is something you often overlook in your own life. You want every moment to feel clear. You want every situation to make sense immediately. You want to move from one step to another without hesitation, without confusion. But life does not work that way. There are moments where you do not fully understand, moments where things feel unclear, moments where your heart reacts before everything becomes clear, and those moments are not failures. They are part of your journey. What matters is what you do next. Do you let that moment define you, or do you move through it, trusting that clarity will come? Because that is exactly what happened here. The fear came, brief, controlled, natural. And then it passed. It did not stay. It did not take over. It did not change who he was. And this is the final lesson, that your emotions are not your identity. You can feel fear and still be strong. You can feel uncertain and still have faith. You can hesitate for a moment and still move forward with confidence. Because strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to remain grounded despite those feelings. And when you understand that, you begin to see your own moments differently, not as weaknesses, but as opportunities to respond in a way that builds real strength. Just like that moment in the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam.